This is Dolynny TV, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, and welcome back to another edition of Edmonton Oilers discussion here on the channel. And yes, indeed, we've got training camp previews being launched across NHL websites, writing websites, whether it be Sportsnet, TSN, wherever you look. There are NHL training camp previews coming out. What do you make of this roster for training camp, that roster? The Oilers still yet to release their roster for training camp. Whatever, we'll manage, we'll be okay. But here's the thing, is now the questions start coming. I mean, I know we've been heavily here on Dolynny TV focused on the World Juniors the past about 5-6 days. But now the questions really start coming about the Oilers training camp, which I believe is scheduled to kick off Sunday, January 3rd. Yeah, that sounds like training camp to me. So, right, obviously the number one question is, we've got a top six this year. However you cut the top six, right, you've got, I guess, 7 players inside the top six is how to look at it from an Oilers perspective of whatever you're doing with Jesse Puljujarvi and Zach Kassian determines how your top six actually shapes up. But the question is, no matter how you look at it, you've got a legit top six according to most Oilers fans, whether it be based on draft rankings, if you have Puljujarvi up there with McDavid, or whether it be based on having a guy that's a rough and tumble power forward like Kassian up there with McDavid, and then obviously having Yamo with Draisaitl. But the interesting question here that is actually posed in the Mark Spector article, training camp preview for the Edmonton Oilers this go around for the 2021 season, is does Ryan Nugent-Hopkins play with Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl? And the question is essentially giving Nugent-Hopkins to either of those two makes the Oilers top line, makes or breaks it. So if you give it to McDavid, he's the top line. You give it to Draisaitl, he's the top line. Doesn't really matter who's on the right side, but the Oilers have 2-3 capable guys, I guess you could say, if you want me to include someone like Jesse Puljujarvi in the top six on the right side that do give the Oilers 2 legit NHL lines with what you need to succeed in a top six in the NHL, compared to maybe 17, 18, 18, 19, 19, 20, considerably, right? So, now that we've figured out Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is a left winger on this Oilers team at current, and is the NHL's North Division best left winger, well, now you've got the fact that whoever he plays with, that is the Oilers' top line. It is no longer the Oilers' top line is Connor McDavid plus. It is, who does Ryan Nugent-Hopkins play with between Draisaitl and McDavid? That's your top line. It doesn't matter. McDavid, you know what? He might be a little overshadowed by Leon Draisaitl entering this season, and that is exactly what we want as Oilers fans. But now the question really becomes, for Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid, how do you maximize that? And that's what Mark Spector was asking in his article, is basically because whoever Nugent-Hopkins play with, that's who gets the number one D pair of the other team more than likely. That's like they will face the number one D pair of the opposing team more shifts than not compared to the other line. So, right, do you put him with McDavid, and do you then have Draisaitl facing second pairing D? Absolutely. McDavid, it doesn't matter who he faces, but allowing Draisaitl to feast and essentially giving the opposing team a matchup nightmare? Perfect, because in place of Ryan Nugent-Hopkins on the second line, you'd have Dominik Kahun, who should fit just as well in there as Nugent-Hopkins did based on his previous play with Draisaitl. You have the fact that Draisaitl plays very well with Yamamoto, and you have the fact that if Draisaitl and Yamamoto and Kahun are playing together, I think Yamamoto is going to know more German than most people in North America by the end of the season, quite honestly. Just pointed a little comment there, but that's a fun one, right? So, right, the Oilers have top six options and configurations that make complete sense. Here's the thing that I'm going to ask, and this is what perhaps we don't get to see out of the article when it comes to how to say this. The article when it comes to Mark Spector's take is the fact that, you know what, when it comes to Zach Kassian, it really depends what you're doing, right? Because Zach Kassian is kind of the question mark even if you have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins on the top line with Connor McDavid. But that's where I'm going, is we've already seen that, and Mark Spector does make mention of that, is for a situation in which Zach Kassian is on Connor McDavid's wing, and you have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins up there on the top line, you need to have Zach Kassian fully engaged. And I'm getting to a question here. I'm not just sitting here trying to put together a story. I'm getting to a question, I promise you that. But what Mark Spector mentions, and I think this is something that we're going to watch develop very quickly for Ken Holland, Dave Tippett, and the Edmonton Oilers, is the fact that, yes, I did mention you have Jesse Puljujärvi. I do not believe Mark Spector mentions Puljujärvi by name anywhere in his tidbit in the article about Nugent-Hopkins and Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. But what I find is the fact that it's a mention without dropping a name, essentially. And the reason that that works out for the Oilers, and the reason why Spector would more than likely do that, is you don't want to sit here and apply the pressure to Puljujärvi to be essentially ready when Kassian fails, because that's implying Kassian will fail. And that's where the question that I'm about to finally ask comes into fruition as Oilers fans. As an Oilers fan, knowing what you know from the pre-playoff game against Calgary that we played in July, and then the 4 games against Chicago, given what you saw out of a Connor McDavid, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and Zach Kassian line, would you, A, B, or C, would you be A, comfortable going into the season, no questions asked, saying, you know what, Nuge, McDavid, Kassian, that's our top line. I know what they need to do to be successful, right? Kassian needs to be buzzing. He needs to be around the net. He needs to contain himself a little bit more. He needs to play within himself and just really do what he does well on the ice well and feed off of the other two. That's A. B, do you go into the season with Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Connor McDavid, and Zach Kassian as your top line, give it 10 games, call it good or bad enough afterwards, and make a change if necessary after 10 games? Or, if you're Dave Tippett and Ken Holland, do you go Nuge, McDavid, Kassian? The second I see something I don't like, Puljujärvi's up there with Connor McDavid and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. Straight up. Now, D, and this is an option that has to be here simply because we know what works and we've seen it work so well. Do you instead forget Nuge, McDavid, Kassian? Do you go default, dynamite line, Nugent-Hopkins, Draisaitl, and Yamamoto, right? Draisaitl, Hopkins. Do you go that way? And then do you go Kahun, McDavid, Kassian, or Puljujärvi? Here's the problem. And the reason I don't really like this option, and the reason this is option D, is simply stated, it is again, realistically, right? Kahun's been on, 4 teams now in 2 or 3 years. You've got, Puljujärvi, who's taken a year of absence, essentially, held out, and now is back to prove himself. So, yeah, he's motivated, sure, but end of the day, right, we haven't seen Puljujärvi in the NHL in over a year, and Puljujärvi in the NHL has never been anything special. So would you even, at the end of the day, feel comfortable walking into the season with a quote-unquote situation we've had before with Connor McDavid having not nobodies to play with? I'm not saying Puljujärvi and Dominic Kahun are nobodies, but compared to the other line option we have with having Nuge with McDavid and Kassian, and then having Kahun with Draisaitl and Yamamoto, I feel that is a lot more secure than having it the other way and sitting here demoting Kassian, who's really, realistically, the contract says he's got to play up in the lineup and got to play up to his abilities, not just stick him in a top 9 role and hope he succeeds on the third line. I really don't see that as a win for Ken Holland if he's throwing that kind of guy on the line on the third line. But again, it's up to the coach, and Dave Tippett hopefully has the idea of how to build this lineup. But really, right, that's the question. What do you, entering the season as an Edmonton Oilers fan, feel most comfortable? A, going 10 games, rocket into the season with those guys, right? No questions asked. Do you go 10 games into the season, make a change bad or for better? Or do you go 1 game? That's it. You know what? Second you don't see something you like, go out there and change it up. Or D, do you go with what works and keep the dynamite line together? It's a question. And I mean, Mark Spector makes a whole ton number of points, and we don't need to go over all that because this is, if there is anything that is going to be the best debate just based on feelings. And I mean, I hate debating people based on feelings because, trust me, feelings are not facts, and just because you feel something does not make it so. And that's the frustrating part about arguing about someone with the way they feel as opposed to the numbers that lay in front of us, is the fact that it's so subjective. Even you're judging yourself based on your opinion. Fair, dandy is what it is. But you look at it this way, is the fact there's 4 options. And realistically, here's the thing. Realistically, all 4 options aren't bad. I talk about option D being a bad option. It's still, compared to the past couple of years, a very good option for the Oilers. But don't forget, we enter this NHL season, essentially, go back to 18-19. Look at our right wingers on that squad entering the season. Ty Ratty, Jesse Puljujärvi, Kailer Yamamoto, Zach Kassian. That's the wingers we entered that season with. Look at the wingers we're entering this season with. Zach Kassian, Kailer Yamamoto, Jesse Puljujärvi. Little messed up, isn't it? That's, oh boy. I guess if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if it's broke, keep it the same. Fun one for you, eh? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Tyson, this is Dolynny TV. I need to get out of this chair. I need to go for a walk, and I need to sit down at about 3 o'clock and get things going. Live stream fires up at 3:30 for Canada versus Finland in what's going to be an excellent matchup in the World Juniors. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for talking Oilers with me this afternoon. Let's go Canada, let's go Broberg, and let's have ourselves an excellent afternoon and evening of hockey here on Dolynny TV. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the rest of your afternoon.